Hi guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. I'm here today with Roel to talk about outsourcing some survey work. Hey Roel, how
Yeah,
are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good, very good. Happy to record this episode with you just before the weekend.
Yeah.
Perfect timing for us. Um, yeah, and so we're gonna talk about outsourcing survey work. That's something that we both did, over the past few years, and we've had discussions with other people on Twitter about it, about doing it and doing it properly, and how not to get into situations where you deliver poor services to the customers, and making sure you're outsourcing to the right person to do the right job. So we thought we would just have this discussion and talk about what has worked for us, and share it with you guys.
Yeah, I think outsourcing is it's one of those things as a small business you don't really want to relinquish some of the control that you have with the work you're doing and how you do your work, the quality, and it
Mhm.
gets to a certain point where you're busy, right? You have a lot of work that you're doing and you need some help, right? You need to offload some of that work.
Yeah, and on the other end, as a small business, sometimes also you don't have enough business to kind of fully hire someone to take on some jobs. So outsourcing can be a great way to outsource some of the work that you have for maybe a particular project, and then get some additional help on this workload that you have currently, but you don't know if you'll have it in 2 3 months. So it's also a great way to kind of help you growing the business.
Yeah, and I don't think we're talking in terms of hiring someone full time to do this work for you.
Hmm.
I think a lot of the times we're just referring to getting someone to assist with a project here and there, but it does become a question of who do you hire, how much knowledge do
Hmm.
they have, can they or are they capable of doing the work for you? So we'll talk about who we've used, or not exactly who, but the types of people that we've used and what can we do from there, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess the first question we can try to answer is, when would you outsource some work to some people, and why would you do it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, for me,
um
the easiest reason is because either I'm not capable of doing it at that time or the time frame that a specific client wants it done. So if I
mhm.
can't negotiate a date where I'm the one that can do the work, then maybe I can reach out to somebody who knows how to do validation surveys to help and assist.
Mhm. Yeah, it's either, for me, it's been either, I'm loaded, I don't have the time, or it's a location issue. I have to do a survey on the other side of the country or in a different country. Then the outsourcing becomes a good option, because you don't have to travel, you can save on travel. The person might be local, then you can offer services to at a good price to your customers. So the location can also be a big factor in why you would want to outsource some of the survey work.
Yeah, and that cost could be a huge part of it. Maybe they don't want to spend or cannot spend money on travel costs, right? That could be very
Hmm.
costly for you, Francois, to have to go from Canada to I don't know, California, right? That's a long trip. And so
Hmm.
maybe the other aspect of that is, oh, look, Roel lives in California. Maybe I can ask him if he could help with the survey work. It's just a drive away for me, and
Hmm.
uh, you have to be creative, right, in terms of what you can and cannot do.
Yeah, and sometimes you have these projects where they want you to do multiple surveys a week in multiple locations across hundreds of thousands of kilometers. So in these cases, you kind of have to put a team together and tackle the work in parallel at different locations. So obviously, you won't be able to clone yourself, and you'll have to outsource some of the work to some other people. So we've seen that as well. Time sensitive projects where you have to do multiple sites a week, and you have to outsource the work.
And I think outsourcing is a very common thing in IT because you and I, Francois, have been contacted by other service providers who are looking
Hmm.
for experts that know how to do survey, know how to use specific applications. For example, there could be a requirement where you have to use Ekahau. and that's what they
Hmm.
want you to provide, the file, or a specific report. So a lot of times those are the requirements that you may look into as well when you need someone to do a validation survey for you, right? You if you're using Ekahau as your primary tool and your reporting feature for your clients, then you want to be able to use somebody that has the same tool, right? They can't use yours, so they would have to have their
Hmm.
own license and be able to perform the work with their own tools.
Yeah, I guess that's a good segue to the second question that we may have. We may ask ourselves, which is, who do we outsource the work to, right? And I guess that's a discussion that we had on Twitter earlier this year, where people were asking, can I just outsource some on-site work to anyone? Do they need any Wi-Fi experience? Um, does it depend? All of these type of questions. And I guess for me, anyway, whenever I've done it, I've always had to do some sort of Wi-Fi related work, whether it's site survey, API on a stick, a validation. So to me, it was important for that person to have Wi-Fi experience to do the work, and also you're going to give kind of a to-do list of tasks for that person to do on site. So you want that person to be able to understand the task, even challenge you on some of the tasks, if they think it doesn't make sense. So I think it's important to understand before you even try to select who you want to outsource the work to. It's important to understand what you want them to do on site, and based on what you want them to do on site, establish like the skills required, so you can choose the best person to do the job.
And I know in the past, when I've looked for somebody to help out, I have always looked for somebody with a CWNE, knowing what it takes to become a CWNE and what knowledge they already have and experience.
Hmm.
That's typically who I've used to do a validation survey. But more recently, I've started to think about that a little bit more and understand what exactly I require out of a validation survey, right? Because you spoke to
Hmm.
different tasks that need to be done. Maybe I just need to validate that how Wi-Fi looks in a specific environment, what the deployment looks. And a lot of times I come down to, all right, that just means they need to understand how to use Ekahau, do that validation survey using an iPad or, some mobile device, know where to tap on the screen, making sure they're not walking through walls, as an example. So they have to understand how to use that application, but then also know what to look out for with a deployment. So sometimes I question myself and thinking, do I really need a CWNE to do that type of work, or can I train someone who is not a CWNE to do that portion of that job, but not necessarily troubleshooting, right? Because that is a
Hmm.
separate task. If we're just talking about validation surveys and outsourcing that portion, do we need someone with a high level of skill set in Wi-Fi to do that?
Yeah, I guess each task will require a different skill set. Usually, what I do whenever I outsource some work, I try to I try to put myself in the shoes of the person that will go on site, and I try to provide as much information as possible to to that person. So, Roel, you've actually done some work for me, so I try to do somewhat of a to do list of a task we have to do on site. Try to details the deliverables expected to have by the customer. That's something that's important for me as well, is understand that the person that will go on site will also be able to produce the output that we're expecting to have. So reporting or whatever needs to be done, taking pictures. It's important for me to understand that person will do that properly, because that's pretty much the work you're sending to the customer, and you don't want to have to redo everything they do on site because it just doesn't worth it. So understanding what, or I guess being clear about what the person has to do on site and then off site when they're done. Understand which tool they'll need. Understand if they have the tools, if they have the skill set to use the tools. I think that's important to choosing the best person that will be, that would go on site for you. Um, it's best if you know the person. I always try to select someone that I know, someone that I've worked with in the past, if possible. And then sometimes you have good experiences, sometimes you have not as good experiences, and you learn from them. But if you have clarity about what you want, clarity about the tools that needs to be used, I think it helps you to find the person that will go on site for you. um,
Yep. Yeah, and to Francois' point, like we've done work, or I've done some work for him in the US, and we just have a good working relationship, right? We've worked together on this podcast, we collaborate all the time. So it just makes sense from your perspective, right? Where we already have a good relationship there. And a lot of times the issues do come across someone you've never worked with before. But if you don't have a process defined, or even the objectives that need to be met for that person on site, and also validating that they know how to do those tasks, right? You do have to
mhm,
make sure that they are capable of doing it, then you can lead to a better outcome. And with that, like you can create a list of people that you could tap into whenever you need help, right? You and I, Francois, share a list of people that we could reach out to if we need to, depending on the location and the kind of skill sets they have, right?
mhm,
And I think it's important to build that network and always stay in communication with these people, build a relationship with them, speak to them, and really understand who they are as people, because that helps build a better working relationship as
mhm,
well. You're able to communicate better and set some specific expectations as what you need to have done. But of course, like even the different environments can be different, right? For example, Francois, I helped you with a warehouse, right? I wouldn't expect any other person who hasn't done a survey in a warehouse to really understand what they need to do, right? How they should walk the facility, what kind of things they should look out for when walking into a warehouse facility. So sometimes it may require a learning curve for them, which means you may do have to do some training, right? Or
mhm.
give them some training in order for them to be successful. It's not something you should just say, "Hey, I need you to do this work," and then set them off and go, "All right, just reach out to me when you're done so I can bill the customer."
Hey, and by the way, don't forget your helmet. What?
Which they might not have, right? Or steel
Yeah.
toe shoes. Like there's a lot of different requirements that you need to
Mhm,
outline for a job, right? And that's why sometimes when you talk about using cheaper labor or inexpensive labor, where
mhm,
there's not too much involved in it, right? If we talk about validation surveys, a lot of it is walking and tapping, but you still have to be aware of what you're doing and make sure you do it correctly. So
mhm,
there is a level of training that needs to be done in order to meet those requirements.
mhm.
What about
I agree.
predictive survey work, Francois? I know
Mhm,
a lot of times it can be difficult to do a predictive without seeing what the site
mhm.
looks like. Now, do you send someone to do that for you locally, and you either have them take pictures, or you do some sort of video conference and they show you the facility? How would you approach that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never actually outsourced someone to do some of the discovering work, I guess. Um, I've always went on site myself. I like to take tons of pictures, even videos sometimes, so I can reference back to them when I do the design. I actually have another one next week, and I'm going to go myself. Um, I mean, if you, it's the same thing. If you train someone and you know exactly what needs to be done, you could. If I do that, though, I would probably use someone that understands the design process, so they will know what to look out for. They would know, to look out for, ceiling structure, and where we can install APs, where are the potential limitations, and find out the switch, the switches, where they're located, the different telco rooms, um, or even take some measurements, and wall attenuation measurements, and so on. So I wouldn't say it's trivial. I would say you still need to understand Wi-Fi design if you want to do it properly, um, because you need to just gather relevant information, right?
Yeah, because that could impact the results of your design if you don't have the right information that you're put into it.
Mhm,
And I think, yeah, having again a process that you outline, and this is something I do sometimes when I go on site. I actually write down every single thing I do that I've done for that particular project at that time. So if that
mhm,
means like, going to the airport, very detailed. Like it sounds like it might be too much, but as long as you have a process in place that can be replicated by somebody else, that makes it a lot more easier for that person. Right.
mhm,
If I'm going to go on site, maybe I'm just going to look around first, look for anything that doesn't match on the floor plan. Right. Sometimes some people
mhm,
might just take your survey and just start walking without even looking at the floor plan, only to find out midway through, like, oh, there's this large wall here that wasn't on the floor plan. Should I tell Francois about that? I'll keep
mhm,
going. Like you want to kind of instill some of um, that work ethic into them, right? And what to look out for, when should they reach out to you, and then also for you to be able to check in with them, right, and see how they're doing. Do they need any help with something? Did they run into an issue? Because sometimes the person going on site for you will run into a problem either with your on-site contact not being there, or
mhm.
maybe they don't know who to
They're
reach once
sick.
they get on site. They're sick. Yeah, a lot of communication needs to happen for it to be
Mhm,
successful. So there again, like even the gathering data. Sometimes I get lucky with the design process where a lot of times I'm dealing with IT people. They'll go and collect that data for me. They want to know how to do it,
mhm,
so I'll instruct them. They'll go and take the pictures for me. They'll even FaceTime me in and go, "Hey, look, on the floor plan there were these little circles there. It turns out those are big, huge cement columns." And they'll show it to me, and they'll like, that's awesome. Like I didn't have to fly
mhm,
out there, and it's easier for them because they're already going on site, and they feel like they're
mhm,
very involved with the process. So you can get lucky that way. So I have done designs where I haven't stepped foot on site, but I have collected
mhm,
enough information from somebody who was able to go on site for me to create a fairly accurate predictive.
mhm.
So it's
And then you
doable.
go back on for the validation?
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think
Yeah,
I've
it's
had one project where I've never gone to do the validation because the client just wanted to cut costs. But of course,
mhm,
again, communication and saying, all right, this is a predictive for a brand new facility. Um, we are not going to send somebody out to do the on site validation. So, therefore, here are
mhm,
the risks involved in doing that, right? Um,
mhm.
so you take on a level of risk, you decide whether you accept that risk, and then you move forward with the work that you need to do.
Mhm. That's good. So we've only talked about survey work, but I've also outsourced some coding this year. So it's totally different subject, but n- not really. You still have to define exactly what you want the other person to do. You still have to do regular checks. You still have to have a good relationship, good communication. So everything we talked about could be applied to other outsourcing work. Um,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the
yeah.
same. It goes back to defining a process that you work with, your exact process that has been successful, and you reapply that to a different scenario. So you've taken similar processes in the survey work and applied it to coding. I've done the same thing when it comes to outsourcing the installation of access
Mhm,
points, right? There's a very specific process that goes on there, very detailed communication that needs to happen. And I've done outsourced projects where the installation, I've not been there while they do it. I've done a walkthrough. I think the
mhm,
walkthrough is probably a critical part for the installer, just because they're physically installing things. But again, when you lay out different communications, and a lot of this comes with experience. For example, when the installer realizes in your plan the access points, in once they actually start deploying, actually ends up being above the warehouse racks, and they understand that that's a problem, then they call you. Like that's good. Like
mhm,
processes are being met. the installers are realizing how you want Wi-Fi deployed. All these kind of things fall into place, and you just want to maintain those relationships with them.
Hmm.
So,
Right.
how did it go with your coding outsourced project? Because that's very different from what a lot of us deal with, but it could
Hmm.
be similar to outsourcing configuration work.
Yes, it went pretty well. The project ended up being way more complex than what we earlier anticipated. So it's taking longer than what we had planned for. But I mean, the engineer is great. We have a good relationships, and everyone is enjoying working on the project. So it's been going well, and we may use the same person for other work in the future, right? So when it works well, it's kind of a win-win situation. And then if it doesn't work well, next time you have a project, you can move on to someone else and try someone else, right? And learn from what didn't work properly the first time around. But
Yeah.
we use the typical apps to communicate, and to transfer requirements, and have questions and comments, and we do regular calls to kind of check up on the progress. So it's fine. It's just like if you're working with someone else, except that um, you're just outsourcing some of the work.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. I see it as a one person part of the team, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. They're part of the team. They're an extension of your team, and they're putting your brand in front. Right? They're working for you.
Hmm.
Some of the things that haven't worked for me, uh, honestly, the only times it never or where it doesn't work as well as I want it to is if I am not setting the right expectations and requirements and not communicating
Hmm.
properly. Those are the times when there's some sort of ball dropped somewhere, right? And either I didn't receive what I was expecting to receive, but maybe because
Hmm.
I wasn't clear on what I wanted them to do. And so again, it really is what when we talk about even design, right? Wi-Fi design, we need requirements. You need to define those requirements for the person that's going to be doing the work for you.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. For me, the times where it hasn't worked perfectly, I had to kind of reread all of the reports that the person would send me, and then kind of redo and fix the layout, kind of make it nice looking, professional looking for the customer. And when you hire a different person to do similar task, and then you receive one perfect report that you just have to read over and send it to the customer, and on the other end you receive a report that you have to spend 2 hours fixing before you send to a customer. You you kind of know who to keep and who to just let go. But it's interesting, and you can see different, I guess, different people, different skills and attention to detail and stuff like that.
I think
Yeah.
one thing that we didn't talk about with outsourcing is costing and trying to
Hmm.
determine how much um, you charge the client, especially when you need to bring on somebody else to help do the work, right? So,
Hmm.
it simply comes down to finding out how much that person's going to cost to help you do the work, and then you either adding a profit margin on top of that and presenting that number to the client. I mean, there's different ways to do it, but
Hmm.
you just want to be clear when bringing that number to the client and be ready to either negotiate or come down, or also you want to be able to buffer enough where you're not going to lose money as well when you're bringing someone else to do the outsourcing work. So again, very clear requirements that needs to be done. um, it could either be kind of like
Hmm.
a fixed price with that person or an hourly rate, which might be a best way to start as you get experience with that.
The I've actually done it both ways. I've done it where the project had already started, and then all of a sudden you need to outsource, so you already know what you're charging to the customer. So then what I've done is go back to the person that I was outsourcing the work to, and then I would ask them, would it work if I pay you X? And then the person is yes or no. This type of scenario, or the other way around, like you said, where you integrate that into your pricing, and then you figure out with the outsourcing, person how much it's going to cost them to do the job, and then you quote out something for the customer. But since you don't go on site, you don't have to include travel. That might actually turn out to be cheaper than sending you to go do the job on site. So it might be a win for the customer as well.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these, it does land in the it depends, but it's about
Mhm.
really discovering what part of the work you're going to outsource, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the part that requires most of your engineering skills to do. Maybe it is sub parts like going on site, gathering some data or even just pictures, right? And it doesn't have to be, an a top-notch engineer to do that kind of work. But again, it means trying to find someone you can rely on, train them up a little to understand the little nuances of what you do, or the little nuances of Wi-Fi, because you might be taking someone who does a lot of like installation work, but now they're starting to deal with software to go gather attenuation requirements for you, for example. And for me, I don't. I have trained people to do that who weren't Wi-Fi experts, so I know it's doable. It's just the process needs to be outlined very specifically so they know that they're going to be doing it correctly, right?
Yeah, and outsourcing requires planning, right? The first time you do it, you'll be like, "Oh, I just outsource it and I'll do nothing." Uh, but when you go through the process, it actually takes some planning for it to be successful, and it takes some time as well. So that's why you have to include a little margin for you as well, so it's worth your time as well when you outsource someone. And don't underestimate that, because it can. If you want it to be successful, you have to do a little bit of work before and after the work is done by
Yeah.
the person you outsource the work to.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we outlined quite a lot. I mean, we haven't talked about every aspect of outsourcing. I think we can go on and on about it and talk about very specific scenarios. But just to start getting this topic out there, because I know I'm going to be doing this a lot more as more work comes my way. I am starting to look for other individuals to help out in some projects. So you might see some posts from me about finding someone who could help out. But I mean, it's a learning process, a learning curve, because we didn't even talk about like rules and regulations and all those kinds of things given the area you're in, right? California has very specific guidelines and rules you should follow versus another state or even another country. So we didn't dive into that, and I don't think we need to in this episode.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you have questions, don't hesitate to send us or a message on Slack, or even on the comment on the show notes. You'll be able to find the show notes and then send us some messages there. And yeah, and build your network. Keep track of the people you work with, and you never know, you might need them in the future.
Yep. Well, we want to thank you guys for listening to this episode again. Let us know if you have any questions or if you want to add additional tips for people who are getting started with this as well. But we look forward to hearing your thoughts. Bye, guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye bye.